going to be what makes a website. Spoiler alert, it all starts with content. So the biggest thing that I want to emphasize through this entire semester is content is king, content is queen, content is royalty. So with any project that we do, we're going to make sure we utilize our content and structure first before we ever get into coding or design and actual building out the website. This methodology or this thought process started to become popular about 15, 20 years ago, even though there's designers and developers that have been using this since the beginning of the internet. One of the biggest pulls for me to start the company that I started was because I was frustrated with the organization that I was working for in the corporate world because they did not focus on content and usability and the overall site as a whole. They were just focused on design. Let's just make the site beautiful. We don't care how it functions. We don't care how the content is interpreted, and we don't care what happens after it goes live. If you start with content, you will see that not only is your website developed and processed productively and efficiently, but the designs will reflect that. And we'll get into more of that as the semester unfolds. Content is everything from images, text, functionality. It can be videos, it can be paragraph text, it can be calls to action, it can be your header, your footer, your main content, your secondary content, anything that is going to be interpreted by the user to relay what your website is all about is your content. Some would even go as far to say that design is part of your content, but I argue that I think design supports your content. Content is the framework of your online presence. There are three things that we're going to talk about today, and all of them incorporate how do we produce content for your project, for your website. And sometimes I'll use websites and projects interchangeably because it's not always just a website in our world. It could be an ad that you're producing. It could be a social media post that you're sending out. It could be a web page, a blog post, and then incorporating how does this blog post flow through the newsletter or through social media. It could be a form. So it doesn't always have to be the entire website. It could be something that you're doing, a project specific to the website. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to map out our content. We call that a sitemap. Then we're going to develop a framework. We call that a wireframe. And then we're going to do a design layout, a design tile, or branding template. So when we map out our content, we want a visual representation of our project. It can be a basic outline to a final sitemap, listing of all the pages as well as sections of our website. It's a roadmap of the website itself. Here's an example of a sitemap. So this is apple.com. I think everyone's familiar with Apple or Windows or the basic idea that we have a main landing page. That's this section right here. And then from that landing page, we have other pages that branch out. And then sometimes within those secondary pages, we have another level of pages that branch out. This is a basic visual example of a sitemap. The pages themselves will have content within them. And sometimes we can take the sitemap a step further and outline each page. We're gonna show this in a wireframe here in just a moment. So that was a visual sitemap. You also have a functional sitemap. This is an example of a functional website. It's an XML sitemap. This is for Moduet.com, my company's website. And what this is this is the actual functional reference to our site itself. Each one of these links map out a different section on our site. For example, pages. This maps out all of the pages that are live on our site today. A functional sitemap is used primarily by your internal system, but more importantly, by an indexing system. For example, Google. Google scans your site, but if you provide a sitemap for Google to kind of follow, or for lack of a better term, a roadmap, it will take that and use your sitemap to properly index your site. That way you get better SEO, search engine optimization, you get better organic traffic, and you get better reference traffic. One other thing, the functional sitemap will closely resemble your visual sitemap. So it's kind of interesting to see you lay out your visual sitemap in the beginning of the project, and when the project goes live, take that visual sitemap and then compare it to your functional sitemap and see how closely they're related. Here's another example of a visual sitemap. This is a basic outline to a healthcare website. It's serving the same purpose as something like this. The only difference is we've outlined 3 key areas of the site. You have your main outline or your main sitemap, which covers probably your main pages. The 4 clinical services, technology, engagement services, and resources are your main pages. And then within each of those pages, you have these secondary pages. Guided employee health programs, chronic condition management clinics, and employee health clinic. That's in that first section. When you're mapping out your sitemap like this, don't think pages, think content. So we have our 4 main content areas that we're going to cover. Then within each of those 4 main content areas, we have secondary content that we're going to cover. When you start writing your content, then you can determine, does this need its own page, or can they share a page? Then on the right, we have secondary content or secondary outline and a footer outline. This secondary outline for this representation, it's pretty administrative in relation to the main content. You have a who we are section or an about section, an executive team, that's another about section, then careers and contact. So for this project, their secondary outline is secondary to that main outline. Then you have a footer. And I wanted to show this example because sometimes you have a site where your main outline is also your footer outline and they're interchangeable. But often you see website projects where there's more than just one main stream of content. And this is an example of that. You have your main outline, but then you have a secondary outline of administrative content. Then you have this footer outline, and the footer outline is either sharing some of the existing content or it's its own section, which this one has not links. It's the wrong word. It's not necessarily leading to more pages as much as it's presenting content in the footer itself. You have contact details. You have a CTA, which stands for a call to action. So there's probably like a form to engage with the user. There is a section called solutions. So that could either be a link to a new page, or maybe they have a short list of solutions that they're going to put on the page. And it looks like they're bringing in their social feed on the footer. When you're mapping out your sitemap, there are generally 4 areas that you're looking at. You have your main landing page. Some people call it the home page. Some people call it a landing page. I call it the pretty much anything interchangeably. Main landing page, home page. It's going to be where everything starts and where everything branches off. Now, some sites, they only have one page. It's their landing page, it's their about page, it's their contact page, because the site details are or the content might be limited. But you'll have your main landing page, then you'll have an about page. This, depending on the website, this could be a main outline or a main content page. Other pages, it could be secondary. Then we have what I call genre pages or genre sections. So that's additional pages and additional sections surrounded around the subject matter of the website. If you're doing a photography page or photography website, and you have a main landing page, and then you have an about the photographer page, the genre pages could be what style of photography that photographer produces. Wedding photos, portrait photos, and each one of those could have their own sections or their own pages, senior portraits, stuff like that. And then you have a contact page. Depending on how much contact content you have, you'll see that a contact page could be a main source of content, or it could be secondary. When you have your sitemap together, you are going to then produce a wireframe. It's a rough draft of each of your pages that brings in the sections, the content, the images, the functionality. Some people call this content mapping. Some people call it content writing. I use the word wireframe in the beginning. That's wrong. Like, we're talking about content mapping, content writing. So what I tell our clients is, now that we have this sitemap, what you as a client needs to do, or if we contract with a content writer, what they need to do is start producing the content for each of these pages. We're still early in the process. We've not talked about design. We've not talked about layout. We want to know what's going to be on those pages content-wise. Give us the images, give us the text, give us the subject matter. Is there specific functionality that needs to happen? Are we bringing in a form? Is it a contact form? Is it a registration form? That way, once we have all of the guts, if you will, then we start building off of that. So from that, we're ready to move forward on the wireframe. The wireframe is your visual placement of all of your page elements. It's a rough mock-up of your content and your framework positioned on a page. There are tons of ways that you can do this. I mean, it's exaggeration. There's hundreds, but it's all, there are several ways to attack this. And for each designer, developer, content writer, they're all unique to their style. And I don't want anybody to get locked into a certain way to produce a wireframe. You can be extremely, what's the word? You can take an actual tool, an online tool, and build it digitally, and I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. But this is a digital representation of a sitemap, or sorry, excuse me, wireframe. And they have gone ahead and placed certain elements on this page. So my interpretation is this is probably a second, like the site's been live and they're now, hey, we're going to build out a new section. So here's a wireframe to represent that. We know where our navigation is going to be. It's going to be on the left-hand side. We know where our secondary navigation is. It's going to be at the top, up here. But then we have what appears to be a slider or carousel on the top here. And then they've declared sections. This is a product page, so these are going to be individual products. There are several sites out there that you can tap into for free to build out these wireframes. Mockflow is a very popular one. They will let you do a trial run if you want to check that one out. The one that I see a lot of more people using is this one. It's just wireframe.cc. You can jump in there really quickly and just start building your wireframes, mapping everything out, and it gives you a short list of tools to identify for each section, or sorry, for each element. Like this is an image, and then we can do here. You can say this is going to be text. Oops. So for each element that you produce, it will let you identify what that element's going to be. And you can produce multiple elements. You can, if I get around here, you can rearrange elements. There's a trick here. There we go. You can resize them. And then you can save your project as a JPEG or as another image file. These are great if you're just, your mind's just very digitally oriented and you like the clean lines and the structure of your wireframe, but you don't have to do it this way. Oftentimes you can just do something like this. And to be honest, this is my route. This is how I start with a wireframe. This is where a lot of our projects start. We might put it out on paper like this and then take it into something like this to present to a client. But this is great because it just gives you the authenticity of how the project's going to start. But we have clearly identified where elements are going to be. Here's a logo. Here's a navigation, like a main menu. And we have a feature headline, and it looks like there's going to be some content in here. This is rough as it is. We've got a calendar, but it's a wireframe. It's allowing us to start our project visually seeing where everything's going to lay out according to our sitemap. And we're even pulling in some content at this point because we've already produced it. We've already mapped out our content. We started content writing. From here, now we're ready to start talking about design. And I mean design from what elements are going to go into our layout, what colors are we going to use, what fonts are we going to use. I like to use design tiles, style tiles, or branding templates when we work on our websites. On very large projects, this is great because then we can hand this over to the client afterwards. We're talking about colors, fonts, styles, imagery, patterns, anything that's going to support the content through visual representation. There's a great resource out there called Style Tiles. It's styletil.es. I highly recommend just checking this out. Even if you don't use this, it's a great way to visually see how do we put a branding document together or a style tile together. This is what I mean by a style tile. We have a logo. Sometimes we're producing the logo, or a third-party designer or an organization already has a logo and they give it to us. And this is our starting point with colors and fonts and texture. And from here, we can identify, okay, what's our main headline going to look like? What's our secondary headline going to look like? What is a call to action going to look like? We call a call to action, or CTA, anything that's going to pull the user to engage more. It could be to a new section, it could be to fill out a form, it could be to sign up for a newsletter, it could be to play a video. This is an example of a basic CTA, or call to action. Then we have what our paragraphs are going to look like. This is our main body text. Here's a simple link example, what a link in a body text would look like. We have our colors, possible patterns. Now, she uses patterns. This could be design elements, it could be texture, it could be patterns, but these are just a window into what some of these elements could look like. And then down here, she gets creative, and she likes to use keywords, not from a search engine standpoint, from SEO standpoint, but like keywords that support her content. Like she wants her brand to be current, to be comprehensive, to be stimulating. What she has provided is 4 examples of what style tiles could look like. Here's another example of a style tile. And with this, she's gone a little bit step further, because here she's just thrown stuff out there. Now she's starting to actually get into some design elements where she's got more of a header and a section divider. And looks like she's got a defined footer color here, but she's still exploring different design elements. Here's the third representation. I think she's kind of going in a different route here, but she does have a background representation here, which I think is pretty cool. And she's showing some design elements within the style tile, like just this overlapping here where you have the call to action bleeding over. And then she's taken these 3 examples to produce a landing page for a website. So this was produced after these style tiles were put together. This is not a style tile. This is an actual screenshot of a site, or a site project. I realize, this is back in 2012 when this was put together, but we have always come back to this methodology, because whether you call it a style tile or a branding template, we're still using these same concepts to search for digital representation of what we're going to produce. So let's review. Content is king, content is queen, content is royalty. Every project should start with content. And the simplest way to approach that is to map out your content with a sitemap. From there, you will produce content for each of those pages or sections. We call that content mapping or content writing. Then you're going to produce a wireframe. That's going to give you your first visual representation of the layout and the framework of the site. And then from there, you will put together a design layout, which is a design tile, a branding template. That way you can look at the actual colors, the fonts, the patterns, the textures that will be in your site or in your project.